A little bit of a tonal whiplash from what we were just talking about, but has anyone here seen Ilhan Omar in this tweet? A little bit of discourse going on around this. A little bit of people getting angry at her over this. Let's take a look, huh? We're gonna need a little bit more volume than that.
In both Palestine and in Afghanistan. I haven't seen any evidence in either cases that domestic courts both can and will prosecute alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I would emphasize that in Israel and Palestine, this includes crimes committed by both the Israeli security forces and Hamas. In Afghanistan, it includes crimes committed by the Afghan national government and the Taliban.
So essentially, Ilhan Omar is coming out with like our argument. Basically, like domestically, these courts do a terrible job of prosecuting war crimes, like all around the place. Okay, we don't Hamas war crimes; they don't really get prosecuted. Israeli war crimes, they don't get American war crimes, they don't get like we don't do it. You know, war crimes happen all the time, and only a fraction of them get any attention or news coverage. Most of them are covered up, and of the fraction that do, I mean, God. You guys remember the war criminal that Trump pardoned on his way out of office? That one guy, the guy who was so crazy that his own squad mates were like damaging his military equipment, so it was harder for him to snipe civilians, and then he got pardoned. His own squad testified against him. His leader testified against like everyone. He was a lunatic. Yeah, and Trump pardoned him because I don't know. Trump was just down for that sort of thing.
So in both of these cases,
Edward Gallagher, thank you.
If domestic courts can't or won't pursue justice, and we oppose the ICC, where do we think the victims of these supposed crimes can go for justice? In both of these cases, if domestic courts can't or...
Okay, I see. So that wasn't Ilhan Omar actually saying that. It was Ilhan Omar reading out a question, which I believe Ilhan Omar agrees with the premise of. So I'll count it anyway.
Won't pursue justice, and we oppose the ICC. Where do we think victims are supposed to go for justice? And what justice mechanisms do you support for them?
Thank you. First, let me just say at the outset that
does anybody know actually, was that a question that Ilhan Omar wrote herself, or was that a question that that Ilhan Omar was repeating from somebody who had sent to her? I assume either way that Ilhan Omar agrees with the premise of the question, otherwise she probably wouldn't be delivering it uncritically, but does anyone know if it was constructed by her, or if it was or if she's being the mouthpiece to somebody else? She's giving a clarifying statement to a tweet she made, I think. Okay, gotcha.
It is impossible not to be profoundly moved by not just the loss of life.
Is this George Clooney? Yes.
Violence and conflict, but especially the children whose lives were lost. And we all have a tendency to throw statistics and numbers out there, but we were talking about boys and girls, Israelis and Palestinians, as well as men and women. And I think none of us, from whatever perspective we come, can lose sight of that. So
okay, so far this is a complete non-answer. This isn't just a dodge the question, okay? This is a anticipate the question and move out of the town the question is going to be entering. He's saying literally nothing right now.
That's one thing that's very important. Look, you know our views on the ICC and its jurisdiction. We continue to believe that absent a Security Council referral or absent the request by the state itself, that's not appropriate. I continue to believe that whether it is the United States or Israel, both of us have the means.
Mr. Secretary,
okay, so yeah, no, okay, she's not answering the question. Okay, gotcha.
I do understand that point. I'm asking what mechanisms do you think is available to them?
I believe that we have, whether it's the United States or Israel, we both have the mechanisms to make sure that there is accountability in
I like that face from Ilhan. There we go. This yeah, okay. We got the appropriate facial expression.
In any situations where there are concerns about the use of force and human rights, etc. I believe that both of our democracies have that capacity, and we've demonstrated it, and we'll need to continue to demonstrate it going forward.
Leftist internet connection.
And in the case of Afghanistan?
With regard to Afghanistan, if it's our objection, as you know, was to the assertion of jurisdiction over the United States in the absence of a Security Council referral. And I believe that we have the means, if there are any cases to be brought, to adjudicate them and to find.
Nice. So we basically get nothing. Okay. So did anybody here see the condemnation that was issued on account of this and Ilhan Omar's statements? Did anyone get a chance to see that? Did they see this like big multilateral condemnation? I know that you just saw that, by the way, right now, and you're thinking like, what possible condemnation could that possibly warrant? You know, what comes of this? Well, if you'll give me but a moment, I will find an image for you. Democratic leadership statement on International Criminal Court comments by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. And hey, they brought out the big guns for this one. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, Majority Whip James E. Clyburn, and so on, issued a joint statement addressing comments made by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. All right? Legitimate criticism of the policies of both the United States and Israel is protected by the values of free speech and democratic debate. That's always a good start, by the way. We have freedom of speech. Anytime somebody reminds people in a conversation preemptively that the First Amendment exists, it's never a good sign. And indeed, such criticism is essential to the strength and health of our democracies. But by drawing false equivalencies between democracies like the US and Israel and groups that engage in terrorism, like Hamas and the Taliban, foments prejudice and undermines progress towards a future of peace and security for us all. We welcome the clarification by Congresswoman Omar that there is no moral equivalency between the U.S. and Israel and Hamas and the Taliban. And not only is this a, let's say, contestable statement, this is actually a straw man of Ilhan Omar's position. If you remember, because we just watched Ilhan Omar, if you remember Ilhan Omar's statement, she did not say the Taliban, Hamas, US, and Israel are all the same. What she said was there was an insufficient degree of accountability for war crimes committed by these groups. That's not the same as a moral equivalency. That's saying that all of these groups commit war crimes. This is a factual statement that you could factually prove by any metric of the term war crime. And that we don't do enough, that none of them do enough to address the, to address those war crimes. And that the ICC doesn't do enough in its own right to serve as a sort of international monitor for these behaviors. She did not engage in moral equivalency, right? Am I wrong on this? She didn't. She did not do that. But for her comment, her question, actually, which was a perfectly reasonable one, she gets a condemnation from the leadership of the Democratic Party. Not just from a few off people. The Brad Schneider denunciation right here as well. This is from another group of representatives. Equating the U.S. and Israel to Hamas and the Taliban, again, she didn't equate, is as offensive as it is misguided. Ignoring the differences between democracies governed by rule of law and contemptible organizations that engage in terrorism at best discredits one's intended argument and at worst reflects deep-seated prejudice. This is the Ilhan Omar is anti-Semitic accusation again, by the way. Anyway, again, this is acting as though she engaged in a moral equivalence, but she did not at all. They are reading into this deliberately with the intent of maligning and strawmanning her. False equivalencies give cover to terrorist groups. We urge Congresswoman Omar to clarify her words, placing the U.S. and Israel as the same category as Hamas and Taliban. Again, it's the same language being used, by the way, here. This intentional misrepresentation of her language in order to make it seem as though she's putting the US and Hamas and the Taliban in the same group. Which, by the way, considering the fact that the Taliban exists in large part because of the United States, ISIS exists in large part because of the United States, and Hamas exists entirely because of the actions of the State of Israel. It is very, very funny that we're throwing our hands up about the potential of moral equivalency here. Whether you like it or not, okay? And this is a fact. This is a fact anybody would have to acknowledge, okay? The United States, the harm that we have done, both domestically to our own population and abroad, is infinitely greater than the amount of harm done by the Taliban. And that is in large part because the United States is a world superpower and not a terrorist group. We have access to far more resources. So naturally, proportionally, we're going to do more harm. And I have no doubt that if the Taliban were given a leadership position over the United States, that the United States would be made more destructive than it is now. This is not a matter of drawing moral equivalency. This is a matter of acknowledging the different relationships that these states have with one another and the ways in which different powers enact war crimes on populations both domestic and external. So, for example, you ever heard the term state-sponsored terrorism? It's not a new thing. The United States has funded plenty of terrorist groups. We've done it in the Middle East. We've done it in Southeast Asia. We've done it in Latin America. We do all the time. We've done this plenty, okay? This is, again, very straightforward history, not some contentious talking point. We produce terrorists because terrorists are several levels below nation states in terms of the types of activity they can engage in. Why did the United States fund terrorist groups? Well, usually because it was a way for us to exert geopolitical influence in a region without committing to troops on the ground, which is a whole political nightmare. So essentially, they're just an extension of state power, though they tend to operate with quite a bit more reckless abandon than military forces tend to. Sometimes. There are plenty of military forces that basically just act like marauding terrorist cells and have historically. One of the easiest examples, of course, would be like, say, for example, Imperial Japan. Imperial Japan, okay? You look me in the eye, you tell me that the Imperial Japanese military meaningfully acted differently to the populations they occupied than terrorist groups, okay? Okay. The point is that geopolitics is complicated, and the relationship that all of these different groups have to one another and the harm they inflict in the world is itself also very complicated. But the statement that there is some categorical similarity between the harm done harm done by the United States and the harm done by, like, the Taliban, even though that's not what Ilhan Omar was saying, that's a correct statement. That's true, you know? You can't really say, well, America's not as bad as the Taliban. The Taliban's killed way more people per person than America has relative to its population of civilians. But when we funded the Taliban, aren't they just kind of a subsidiary in a way, like a product of the the effluence of nation states? One way or another, it's a ridiculous argument, and Ilhan Omar said absolutely nothing wrong. Another important thing to point out, by the way, another critical thing to point out, is that this is what gets a multilateral condemnation from the Democratic leadership. Not, say, Joe Manchin, not Cinema, not the people who have been openly and loudly obstructing elements of Biden's proposed economic stimulus. That doesn't get a condemnation. That's just democracy, baby, you know? They get to do whatever they want. Republicans all act in lockstep, but Manchin and what have you, they get the banter. Do we want the filibuster? Do we not want the filibuster? I don't know if I agree with this tax bill. That doesn't get a condemnation. Nobody's coming down on Manchin, but we come down on Ilhan Omar and strawman her for asking if there's anything we can do to deal with the poor systems we have in place for dealing with war crimes. It's ridiculous, is what it is, okay? And this is, by the way, this is one of the reasons why the Democrat Party is not in and of itself sufficient in challenging Republicans, is not sufficient in challenging the encroach of fascism into our country. This is just another way in which they will dedicate resources towards tiny excesses from the progressives in their party while largely ignoring I'm not saying that Joe Biden can snap his fingers and just make Joe Manchin agree with him, but I am utterly unconvinced that the Democratic leadership have done everything they can to move over Manchin and Sinema on their more progressive elements of their plans. I am not convinced on that. I am just not. If that's the case, then why is Manchin comfortable so publicly obstructing this process with like minimal pushback? No, I do not believe they have done all they can. I do not. And all this isn't a side point, of course, because Ilhan Omar really did say nothing wrong. Kyle said a similar thing. Well, then Kyle was right when he said that. Yeah, I do not think Democrats have been doing anywhere near enough to push for their agenda, and I do not think it's mostly a rhetorical thing for me, by the way, because Joe Biden could be going up there and giving like speeches to the press every other day, talking about how badly the American people need stimulus, how badly the American people need the help of their government, and how sad it is that there are people in the Senate, in the House, who aren't willing to work with him on passing a bipartisan agenda designed to help Americans, an agenda that conforms to the wishes of the majority of the American people. But he doesn't talk like that. He doesn't go out there and act like that firebrand that we need right now. Even if it's just rhetorical, it does a lot to get the American people on your side. Look at the power of words. Donald Trump, he runs this campaign cycle the entire presidency. And what does he have at the end of it? What did words get Donald Trump? It got him about 100 million cult followers, is what it got him, okay? By constantly and relentlessly pushing his agenda, his vision of the world, he got people on board with him, and now he is the strongest cult of personality active in the United States. Words matter. What does Biden do? Biden, he wants to pass X, he wants to pass Y. Quietly stop talking about the public option, quietly stop talking $15 an hour minimum wage. Yeah, we'll do that in the next bill, No need to talk about it publicly, I'm sure it'll come around eventually, Good old Joe. He's coming for us, don't worry. Oh yeah, one last fun bit, by the way. As long as we're ragging on Democrats, here's a little bit of Feinstein right here. A quote from our friend Andrew Solender. It's not actually a quote from him, by the way. He's just reporting on this. Feinstein asked about some Dems saying they'd choose democracy over the filibuster. Quote, "If democracy were in jeopardy, I would want to protect it, but I don't see it be in jeopardy right now." Feinstein, by the way, is the 6,000-year-old. She's about 200 years old. Ghoul, the Fallout NPC. How can you possibly say democracy is not in jeopardy right now? Oh yeah, I'd remove the filibuster. If our democracy was under threat. But what recently has happened to make democracy under threat? What has taken place recently that would give anyone the impression that any element of our democracy could possibly under threat? Okay, sure.